ed, ed. Because bilingualism, right? She's like, oh, you want me to take away the R from red? I'm there. I'm there. Okay. So, last two pieces, not to say the least ones. It's so important that we pay attention to English language development in our programs as well. Sometimes we don't talk enough about that, I have to say, in our field. We talk a lot about native language and bilingualism. We have to talk about how we do English. What I want to make sure is that we don't forget what we know about effective second language development or English as an additional language development as we're having discussions around how to make sure that our students improve on their English proficiency, how we can get them ready to do tests in English, because they will be assessed using tests in English. And so that we don't forget along the way how important it is to pay attention to oral language development. I don't know how much you've been in classrooms, a lot I know. I still have too many classrooms where it's all about reading, writing, and the teacher talking. It's like, where's the space? Where's the space for the kids to actually play with the language, know the language, use the language for all of the different purposes that the child needs to learn that in terms of schooling? We need to focus on meaningful communication. Why do we learn other languages? It's not to learn grammar, right? Well, some of us might. When I learned German, I loved the grammar part. It's like, I'm not going to talk to that was not necessarily for communicative purposes, but the children that we have in our school, they have to learn it and want to learn it for communicative purposes. So let's not forget, that's why we do this, to communicate what we know, what we care about, our emotions, all of those things. Vocabulary, of course, is important. Background knowledge is hugely important. But remember the fonts of knowledge piece earlier? Background knowledge for our kids that may sound and look a little different than for other kids. So let's make sure that we pay attention to that. And then very importantly, part of English instruction, we do not need to take a monolingual approach to that. Remember, bilingually thinking about what we do in our programs. Cross-linguistic connections and building that meta-linguistic awareness is going to be a huge piece of what students need to learn. And then last but not least, we talked about this all along, is that we reject these deficit discourses. And I would say, instead of embracing these resources that children bring, we are still squashing them, as Goldenberg and Wagner say. And so we have to start thinking about how do we bring in what I would call not so much a language as a resource orientation, because sometimes that focuses only on one language or the other, but really it's bilingualism that's our resource here, right? It's not just the native language that's a resource for teaching, it's also what they know in English. So it's bilingualism. Remember the benefits. The benefits is not about you knowing your native language. The benefit is not knowing just English. The benefits come when we have both languages chugging along together. So I call that bilingualism as a resource and tapping into that. And really taking this affirming piece that you mentioned earlier. I've got to close here. Some people call this asset-based instruction. And I'm struggling with that term a little bit. Do you hear that in your people around you talking about asset-based instruction for bilingual learners as opposed to deficit? And I'm trying to figure out why I'm having a hard time with it. Maybe it's because it's such an economic term. You have assets. So I'm struggling with that. We'll see if we can find another way of talking about that. So why does this work? Because we apply these bilingual learning principles, we have maximum cognitive investment, maximum learner identity investment, and we have optimized learning transfer. We cannot afford not to do this because, as you heard earlier, this high-speed thing, our learners are not just keeping up, or at least I'm going to skip over this one, go to the last slide here. It's not sufficient for our students to survive and keep up. What that does is it keeps the gap between where our students are and the native speakers at the same pace. What we really need to do is to accelerate. And I think, and I firmly believe, that the only way to accelerate learning for our bilingual learners is to treat them as bilingual learners and to organize our instruction bilingually in terms of teaching bilingually with them and supporting and connecting to all of the experiences that we have. So that's our task, which I think is extraordinarily hard. So I hope that there's been, along the way, several ways that we've tried to broaden that conversation with maybe other entities, other stakeholders, to say that bilingual and education for bilingual learners is more than language of instruction, that we need to look at the whole picture in terms of the school, that teaching and working with bilingual learners, broadening the conversation, means that we need to bring in bilingualism and research on bilingual learners and how bilingual learners learn, both bilingually as well as through a second language. And that ultimately, that the broadening conversation has to stay grounded in the students and their cultural, linguistically diverse experiences. Thank you. And I took it to at 5:45. Sorry, I was really thinking we could stop earlier.
Thanks so much, Esther. Whoops. Can you all hear me? Yes. Thanks so much, Esther. For those of you who want to continue the conversation with Esther, at 11 o'clock, she'll be in the Balmoral Ballroom. And our next set of sessions will be starting from 11 until noon, and then we'll be coming back here at 12:15 for lunch. So, and again, don't forget this is being videotaped, so you can share Esther's wonderful presentation with others. Thank you very much.